Welcome to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. We want to encourage, equip, and connect those with a passion to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Student ministry can be a lonely place. You might even feel like you're the only one in your church or community that cares about students. Well, know this, you're not alone. People all across the country are engaging Gen Z and care deeply about the spiritual direction of these young men and women. Whether you're full-time, part-time, bivocational, or volunteer, if you have a heart for students, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the podcast. We're thrilled that you have chosen to listen in today as we continue the conversation about student ministry. Now, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to leave a rating or review on whatever platform you're using. Also, let me encourage you to contact us at info@studentministrymatters.com to let us know how we can further minister to you as you seek to impact the next generation for Jesus Christ. Now, on today's podcast, we are going to talk about the importance and some best practices for communicating with our congregations. I've got Micah Powell and Chris Vines with me today. Welcome, guys.
What's up,
Good
man?
to be here, man.
Well, before we get into our discussion, it's time for the random question of the week. And this week, well, I finally got to watch the last of the Rambo movies and made me wonder, who is your favorite movie action star? So let's start with you, Chris. Who is that guy?
Oh, man. I tell you what a question. I mean, who in their right mind wouldn't say, Arnold Schwarzenegger? I mean, he was in fact the last action hero.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going to say that. I mean,
Just going to throw that out there.
just going to throw it out there. Man. Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't think Arnold would be my favorite though. I'm going to have to say that my favorite action person is, oh gosh, I'm up in the air between a couple, and so I'm
Follow your gut.
man, oh, I know
Just say
that's
it.
it's a dangerous place.
Brother, I know. You're talking to Micah Powell, bro. I know.
Okay. Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis.
Die Hard, baby.
There it is.
Oh,
Follow my
boy.
gut. You got me. All right, Micah, you go.
I mean, it's tough for me too, but so it's got to either be, and yes, he's been in action movies. I'll quote it, but my favorite guy is Matthew McConaughey for sure in Reign of Fire. I loved that movie. But probably no, I take that back. Probably my favorite is Gerard Butler. I mean, he just got
Dude,
that.
we're not talking about man crushes.
I know we're not, but dude, they're both in action movies. I mean, I know McConaughey's more he's more rom-com, but dude, for real, I think Gerard Butler's my guy. Come on, Hunter Killer. Wait, is it Hunter Killer? No, wait, that's not right. London Has Fallen, Angel, Olympus Has Fallen. I forget which one it was, but I mean, come on, great movies, man. He's in all kinds of action.
300.
Films. 300. I didn't even seen that movie, man. Wow, I didn't even know he's in that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's another one. There's another really great movie that he's in. So yeah, he's my dude. Don't make fun.
Wow. Okay. Well, one of the things now is because of all of these comic book movies, you've got a whole bunch of action heroes that you could pick from. But I have to go back to the classic. His movies, his acting isn't great, but he is the greatest of all time, Chuck Norris.
Oh gosh. Oh, CN, man. My goodness.
Man, he can kick, he can punch, all those cool things.
It's because you're a Taekwondo guy.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, I like Sylvester Stallone. I like all of the Rocky into the Creed movies. I like
Nice.
the Rambo movies. He checks a lot of those boxes as you go along. But as we are definitely not action heroes ourselves, but we still can be considered ministry stars with our people if we take the time to communicate properly. While this need for this has been highlighted during COVID-19, proper communication has always been an important characteristic of good student ministry. Now, there are three major areas of communication that we focus in student ministry, and we've talked about some of these before on our program. I'm sure you will be thinking about those in the years and time to come. But we've looked at like communication with our pastor. It is vital to talk with your pastor, to let him know where you're headed and to make sure that you're on the same page. We also have talked about communication with our parents, speaking to parents, letting them know what's happening with their precious babies. Man, that is important. As someone who's gone through the whole gambit, and now my kids are in college, I wanted to know, and I still want to know what's going on with them. Now they're adults, though, so I'll let them go wherever for the most part. And then today, we're going to be talking about communication with our people. This idea of what it is as we are communicating. Maybe it's vision. Maybe it's the truth of situations. Maybe it is our plans, the needs of our students, all of these different areas we want to be able to communicate with our people. So let me throw out this first question. Why is it important to communicate well with our congregation? Why is that a need or should be at the heart of kind of what we're doing in student ministry? What do you think, Chris?
Well, I think as student pastors, this is often overlooked. I think the first question we often think about is, why is it important to communicate well with our students? And I think that is a good question. But in terms of our congregation, I think it's equally important, just because we need to, one, understand among ourselves that our student ministries are not separate from the church. And we need to make sure that our students know that as well. So I think in, answering this question of why is it important to communicate well with our congregation, I believe part of that is it shows our congregation, when we do communicate with them, that that we care deeply about our church and not just a certain part of the church. In other words, we convey to all of our people our love and our concern for more than just teenagers, even though that is our the calling that we have on our life. So there's more that needs to be said, I'm sure, but I think that's how I would probably start that conversation.
Is this idea that we care more for a church as a whole? Is that kind of what you're thinking, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's important that we communicate to the whole congregation that we are men who that love the church, and again, not just a small part of it. I think it's very easy for us to get wrapped up into the agenda of student ministry and forget about the vision of our church as a whole. And so, in communicating well with our congregation, I believe we show just where our heart truly is, that we love our church and not just certain part of it. Does that make sense?
It does. That's does.
Good.
Yeah. Again, there's more that needs to be said. I just think, in answering that question of why it's important, I think that's where I would probably start that. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, I would wholeheartedly. I'm sorry, man. I would wholeheartedly agree. I mean, clear, concise, unified communication from the pastoral staff, or just unity. I mean, as you got to have that unity, being able to communicate with people and being on the same page, because you don't want somebody to go up that's if you have an announcement time, and not every church does, but if you have an announcement time, and I think it can get really long winded, and there can be. You don't want to convey pride or, favoritism. And I think really talking with your pastor first and vision casting and talking about what's going to be said in the announcements, and to make sure that people, and even, people that are, extroverted, typically that they're not just, I don't want to say the word stealing the spotlight, but trying to be, clear, concise, and unified in the way that we present ourselves and how we present information to people. Because there's a way too, guys. I know this, Dan and Chris, but there's a way to over-communicate, to communicate too much in a session, and because that is my personality, I have to be careful And I'm grateful for the men that God's put in my life to, when we were meeting in our pastoral meetings, that they were teaching me to, how not to over communicate something, and how not to, what needs to be said needs to be said, and don't give too much information. Just give what the people need, and not necessarily what I don't say what they want, but just overkill. So,
and that can be hard to not overshare. When you're excited about something, not just you, Micah, but all of us, it is, we have a tendency to want to tell them everything about it. Our heart behind it, what's going to be happening, what their end result's going to be, how this is going to impact us 10 years down the road. I mean, if we're excited about something, there is that possibility. And so, man, that's incredibly important to be concise, to be, I don't want to say pithy, but you have this idea that I'm going to be able to tell you what I'm passionate about in such a way that you can get there without hearing it all.
Yeah.
Well, a couple other things.
I'm so sorry,
go
man.
ahead, Micah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't raise my hand, man. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
I just
go ahead.
I just wanted to, because like I said, you guys know I am a little extroverted, but when you get excited about something, like you said, you typically want to talk a lot, and all of us would be excited about what God's doing in our ministry. And one thing I did that was a really great practice of not over communicating was writing it out. Like before I went into a meeting with the pastor, about what we're communicating on Sunday, how often we're going to communicate it, and to make sure. And that kind of seems like maybe not petty, but like kind of I don't know, overachiever maybe or something. But it's really important to meet with your pastor and to talk about what's going to be said. Maybe what information needs to be said, and help him kind of help you fine comb what not to say. If you're going to speak, and what he doesn't need to say. And I think that's important balance when you're meeting with your pastor to talk about what's going to be communicated to the people, because it does show unity that you're meeting and talking about this together, and that's huge.
Right.
Supporting each other's ministry.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, Micah. Thinking about trying to clarify exactly what I was saying earlier. In terms of just importance of communicating well with our congregation. I do think it's important to communicate to the whole congregation. That's what I was trying to say. In order to show the whole congregation your love for them and for the church, but also I think it's important to show them, like you guys are saying, help them to know the plan, know the vision of the church. And that doesn't come just from one individual, like you're saying, Micah. It comes from the unified effort and prayers of people seeking the Lord. But I think this all plays a part of, we want to be people who communicate not just information, but we want to be people who communicate, pastors who communicate right information well to the people. And so in this conversation of communication, why it's important is, I think for those two reasons. When we start communicating right information to just a certain segment of the congregation, well, that's not going to create unity. So we've got to communicate well to the whole congregation. And then it's also important because it shows the whole congregation the plan, the vision of where we believe God is leading our church to go within our community and within our world.
Yeah, and I definitely, for sure, and also, it'll tell people. And I know you guys see this. You go to a student ministry, and someone will say, "Man, this church has an amazing student program." Or this church has an amazing children's program, or man, the pastor really loves, his preaching, and just this kind of, clear, concise communication, unified communication, kind of, before, you get with your people it'll help everybody see that every ministry of the church is important, because it's ministry. It's people serving others and serving God and then serving others. And I think that's massive. I think that's how you kind of fix the, some of the thoughts that people have about, this ministry's better than this ministry. And it kind of helps break the cycle of, that individualism ministry, that powerful personality ministry that, a lot of people are trying to equalize in their church. That there's a lot of other good ministries going on. And I think that's huge, Chris. I think that was well said.
Mm. Well, let me share maybe a slightly different take on it. And I completely agree with what you guys are saying. Good communication is going to be supportive of the whole church, needs to be to the whole church. There's a couple of things that I was thinking that might be helpful to someone who is maybe starting in ministry, who doesn't see that value right away. As they grow into it, they may kind of receive that. There are a couple of things that good communication from the student pastor can do. One is it shows the people that he is taking time or she is taking time with those concepts and is thinking things through, that they are thoughtful about what they're doing. That's really important, especially as you're dealing with people with years of church experience, people who are a lot of wisdom. They want to know that somebody who is thoughtful, who is working with their students. The other thing is, as you communicate well, you're communicating vision, plans, you're communicating those things with the church as a whole. You're helping others who want to support that ministry understand what's going on. And maybe you have a need in that ministry. Maybe you need to express something because you need funds for a new sound system for your student space, or you need new monitors in there, any number of things that you want to do, or a mission trip, a way to serve and to show your students what it is to be Jesus in a space. I think that that's really important. So for us to communicate well, that helps our supporters understand that better. And this is a totally kind of a free piece of advice. If you are in a church as a student pastor, let me encourage you to go to your Christian seniors group for their luncheon. Most churches have one. Go to that, get to know those people, not just so they'll financially support you, but so that they will pray for you, so that they can be supportive. And you may not feel comfortable with it, but just take some time with that. So let me encourage you just to look at that. Look at the importance of communicating well with your congregation. Well, let me ask this second question. How do we best communicate with our congregation? What are some best ways that we can approach that? Chris, do you want to get us started with that?
Sure, man. I don't want to take too much time either on this one, but I did jot a few things down on just some tips that I have that just kind of swirl through my mind, and so maybe this will be helpful for some. I think it's important that we be honest and transparent. I don't think anybody would intentionally lie. I hope not to our congregation, but I do believe we need to be intentionally honest and transparent. And I know there's a fine line there. I mean, there's that question out there: how honest do we need to be? How vulnerable do we need to be with our congregation? I think that's a good question, and probably could be a whole nother podcast on its own. But that kind of leads to the next one. I think it's important to be wise how we communicate and what we communicate. My dad used to always say this short little phrase, and it's just stuck with me, and it applies in several different contexts. But he said, you don't have to tell everything you know. And I think, Micah, you said something similar to this earlier. And so I think it's important that in our communication, we be wise. I think it's important that we be consistent, that we don't have one idea one week and then another idea the next week, and we're just communicating all over the place, because that's going to obviously create a level of distrust, or just make people not really pay attention to what we're communicating and to our voice.
Yeah.
I think in these times that we are living in right now, in these days during COVID-19, it's shown us that our communication needs to be timely, that there's some wisdom in that, and just having good, timely communication with our people and with our students. And then the last two things I'd say, as far as how we communicate, I think we need to be clear, and I think we need to be calm. I think people, especially people that we're leading, they don't need their pastor, their student pastor, their leader, panicky. They don't need them out front, just screaming that the sky's falling. I think we need to have a clear voice, and I think we need to have a calm voice. And so there's more that we need to say, but those are just some things that I jotted down.
Micah, what do you think? What are some of the best ways to communicate with our congregation?
Not to try to stay away from Chris's too, because really a lot of really, Chris, I mean, those were really good. I was right there with you on 2 or 3 of those, but to stay away kind of from what you did, I would say even, I would add, communicate humbly and joyfully. And that the way, the best way to communicate, and to do that, I think you have to have like an excited, but kind of like you said, Chris, there's the panicky side of the way we communicate, but also you have to have joy in what you're communicating, because sometimes it can be rhetoric. It can become normal conversive conversations, normal things that we talk about, and so in the times that you have, that is, by the way, precious. If you're speaking to congregations, that is precious. The time that you have allotted is precious. Stay within that time. We have preaching, we have worship, we have, singing and praising and prayers. And so be careful that, with the time that you have, with wisdom and clarity, of course, but then also joy, really bring, if your heart's not in it, the people will see it too. If you're panicky, that's going to come out in the way you present if you're not careful. But, people can also sense if you're tired, or if you're, if you're doing too much, or there's a lack of clarity, and so just make sure that you're being careful with what you communicate, and have joy in it, that like this is something that God's given you, that you love to do, and I just think that that's important, because I know all of us have seen where somebody get up and give an announcement, and you're just like, oh boy, and we don't want people to do that when up and speak. We want them to say, well, man, this is an exciting time for our church, that we all feel this way about whatever it is, that this is an exciting time, that we get to love others in our community, and this is how we're going to do that, and just be excited and be a breath of fresh air, be light to people in the way you communicate, because Jesus was light the way he communicated with us. And I as my Savior, as cliche as this is going to sound, I'm so grateful that he communicated in some of the ways that he did. But man, the passion and light and joy that he with the way he spoke, I think spoke to so many people in his time, and even in our time. His words, they transcend just the Bible times, and they're even in our times, and we're before the times of the Gospels, and just having that incredible joy that, when you present whatever it is that you get to do this, that God is moving in whichever way, or that, just make sure you communicate joy. I think it's the biggest thing I would add.
Yeah.
That's really good, man. I was just thinking, you saying that, I think it's a good practice for us to look at Jesus and look at all the different ways that he communicated. We see him at times sitting down, teaching in a very calm but authoritative way. Of course, we see Matthew telling us that. Of course, the Sermon on the Mount. But then we also see times where Jesus is communicating with a whip in his hand. And so there's a wide range of how Jesus communicated to the people he was around. So I think that's a good thing that you brought up there.
Well, in that scripture, even, that you guys, that we all know, and it's there, and it brings joy to my heart, because I am a joyful person. I love God. I'm not perfectly joyful all the time, but my favorite text right now that it makes me so like just happy in God and who he is the text that says, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. I love that verse. And if I want to communicate something, even if especially if it's not, something that's in the preaching time, like I hate to take away from the preaching time, as I'm sure you guys know, right? You hate to have to take away from that. And not that that's what you're going to do by giving an announcement, but Jesus, he endured the cross, but it was the joy that was set before him that he was able to endure the cross, despising the shame. And that just makes me, reading that just fills me up, knowing that whatever I present, I need to be careful, but also I need to be joyful, and celebrate this awesome stuff, and celebrate everything that I can, even if it's not some announcement that I'm having, to celebrate what another pastor on staff is doing. I just love seeing what God is doing through pastoral ministry, and even, people in our congregation. and speaking to them joyfully, about, guys, thank you so much for your support. Like, we just adore you guys. We love you so much. We pray for you so often. And in your communication, don't just get up and say, hey, here's this event. Here's this thing we're trying to do. Here's this fundraiser. Just talk to them about how much you love them and appreciate their support and their heart and how much joy that gives you. And it may change. That may make someone's day, that's going through, especially these hard times right now. It may give somebody joy that needs joy. I mean, that's one thing I wish I could give every human being in the world. If it was just something I could wrap up and give, I wish I could. But that's just my 2 cents.
Mm. Well, I love that, Micah. My dad passed away 10 years ago, but one of the pieces of advice that I've always taken away, he said, if you're leading an organization, you need to speak with enthusiasm. Real simple thing, but man, it's powerful. The joy, enthusiasm, you get people excited, and it's not out of an inauthentic place. It comes from what Jesus has provided and what he's done. And so we got clear, concise, speak with joy. Man, these are great concepts for us to take and to embrace. So let's get to some practical points before we wrap up today. What are some ways that you communicate, whether it's information, truth, vision, to the people in your congregation about your student ministry? I know that with me, I did something very simple, and it is probably outdated now, but one of the things that I did for several years is that I weekly made a little newsletter. Then I made a PDF, and I emailed it out to my parents. They would have that. They would be able to print it off. I would give it to the students, but for them to walk out the door, actually hand it to a parent, we know that doesn't happen much. So I emailed it so they had it too, and so that they couldn't say, well, I didn't ever see it. And so as we talked about, it also provided me a great time to really think about what was next in my ministry, because I knew they were expecting this weekly newsletter. They were expecting to know what was coming up. It also kind of pushed me in that direction. And at the time, I was also a worship pastor as well as the student pastor. And so I was carrying both of those loads. So it, again, gave me a little bit extra focus. There are tons of ways out there now for us to communicate, especially, as Chris said, in this season that we're all in. What are some of the ways that you're communicating information? You're getting that vision, that information out to your students. How are you getting those things across? Chris, how are you doing that?
Man, I employ the KISS method. You know it. It's keep
Roast.
it simple, silly.
There you go.
Keep it simple, silly.
Silly.
There's various versions of that, but no, I communicate to our parents and I communicate to our students, and I do that primarily through Facebook Messenger app and text message. And so I keep it pretty simple that way. And thankfully, up until this point, that's how I've communicated to them. And so during this time where we've been, in a certain sense, scattered, that simple line of communication has proven to be effective. People aren't scrambling and wondering, where am I going to get this info? They already know. And so that's been helpful. And I've also just found that through trial and error, because I haven't always done this, it does change, I think, in every so often whenever kids are rotating out of student ministry and you have new ones coming in, and you just have to reassess to know exactly what the best line of communication is. But in my experience, it's been trying to, getting a message, information into the device where they're already going to be. So most people receive text messages, so that seems to be the best place. And then most of my parents are on Facebook and in the Facebook Messenger app. So that's proven effective for us. And in that, I don't just give, general information, even though that does come, but I also try to, for our parents, I try to forward them articles to read and different things like that would be helpful for them as parents. So
great.
those are just two mediums that have really been effective and consistent for our ministry.
Let me ask on a more practical nature. When you're using Facebook Messenger app, do you have one big group that includes everybody, or do you send these out individually?
No, I have one big group. I have a Messenger app that's labeled, Garrett Student Ministry Parents, and at the beginning of every new school year, when we have some type of meeting, whether it be virtual, I've tried Facebook Live meetings before, or I've tried in-person meetings. It just depends on, again, the timing of everything. That's when I reassess and just make sure I get new information to tell parents, where we're going to be. And like I said, nine out of 10 parents are going to be on Facebook already. I've found out there's a very, very few of them who are not on Facebook. And, but most of them, if they want to find the information, they're willing to get the Messenger app to do that. So again, that's been helpful. And that's it's one message that I have to send, so I don't have to worry about all these individual ones.
So if that is to the parents, if that's to those that go to students and parents alike, how are you getting that sort of information then out to the congregation as a whole?
Well, I would say that not every piece of that information that I send to parents needs to go out to the congregation as a whole, but when there is info such as that, that's when I usually either create a graphic or give the information to our communication director that we have. She works part-time for our church and just manages all of our social media accounts and different things like that. She puts together our newsletter. And so we're very thankful for her and all that she does. And she also serves within our student ministry. So she's got a good beat on just things that are going on in there already. So I would say that kind of stuff I send to her, and then she puts it out along with all the other information from other ministries in our church.
Good. Micah, how about you? How do you get information and in the ministry positions that you've been in the past? How do you get that information about the student ministry out to the congregation?
As we've kind of gotten to know each other guys better through this, I've gotten to know Chris and Dan through this podcast probably than maybe in person, guys, I would say. But my little kind of thing, a little thing about my favorite way to communicate is actually, I do like to be in front of face-to-face contact with people, but man, writing, I love to write. So I enjoyed writing my newsletter or bulletin, and I always tried to put a synopsis version of, what I handed out in my parent meetings that I had twice a year. You have like the summer months that are nuts, and I always try to have a meeting right there before the chaos begins, so that parents kind of can know, what's, kind of how we're going to handle certain things and all that. But at the beginning of the year, I gave them like, and I wouldn't say just like pages of stuff, but just, try to keep it simple, as Chris said, and made things clear, concise, and, unified, like, hey, here's what we're trying to do, and cast the vision and write it out and talk to them with their kids in the room. And then usually as stuff came up, I try to produce a year calendar at that point, usually around August, and then would write tentative, of course, because nothing's in stone, right? Because we're not sovereign. But just kind of say, hey, here's the tentative schedule. And so I kind of chose to write, and, but I also used Messenger and Remind and all kinds of different ways to communicate, all kinds of different ways to communicate. But writing was probably my favorite one because it always made conversations happen. I would always have someone come up and say, and I love this, you didn't put a period. And I'd be like, thank you very, very much, Miss Nichols. I appreciate that. Or I could, it always made conversations happen, and I could kind of put kind of my heart and flair into it. And, and then in my bulletin or my newsletter, during the week, I would try to very much just the upcoming, and just bullet it, if they gave me a certain couple lines for the bulletin or that newsletter, then, I would write it out, and, just very simple. And that was probably one of the best ways I communicated at 2 different churches before. And that was definitely the most effective. especially like the newcomers coming into a church service, especially now. Man, the announcement stuff, it's tough to communicate because you have so little time. I know as you both have experienced, I haven't had that experience, but I can't imagine the difficulty of that. But to try to communicate with parents, from a writing standpoint, parents have more time to read now than they ever do, so this could actually be the best time to, send out if they send out a bulletin or a newsletter to your people in the mail, then this might be the best time to say, hey, here's what the student ministry is doing. And here's what, and get with your pastor and your secretary and whoever else you associate or whoever else you have and just create a newsletter and send it out to your people. Hey, here's what to expect. Here's how we want to communicate with you. Here's a way to connect with us, and they'll read that because if it's from, you, and you can even give a personalized note to the specific people you're sending it to, hey, if young Jimmy, would like to join us on Zoom or something, like here's the email link or here's the invite and we'll start at this time. And anyways, writing can be huge. It can be an incredible ministry. That's kind of the way I would communicate it for sure.
That's great. One of the things that we see is that it's a flow of information that we're trying to get to people. We want to keep it simple, silly, as we had said earlier. But it is important for us to just boil it down as much as we can, because while communication of the truth is at the heartbeat of what we do, we don't need to get bogged down in these other things. We want to be about God's word, about relationships, about making disciples. And so we want to communicate truth because ultimately, or communicate not just truth, but communicate information because that will help our ministry and be a great benefit. Communicating well with our congregation can provide a great number of positives to our ministries. Hopefully you found a little encouragement here tonight and a few practical ideas to take with you as you work to make your student ministry the best that it can be. Take the time to communicate well. It matters because student ministry matters.
Thanks for listening to the Student Ministry Matters podcast. Get connected at studentministrymatters.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Student Ministry Matters. Until next time, keep up the great work with your students because the work matters.